Effective immediately, I am canceling the last administration's completely one-sided deal with Cuba.
Changing course on Cuba, the president comes to Miami and announces a crackdown on the Castro government.
He doesn't know anything about Cuba. He listens to Marco Rubio.
He's going to squeeze them a little bit until they start treating their people right.
What did the president do? What did he not do? And what will it all mean? A full house here today for that debate.
The Democratic candidates for governor come to town, and one who you may not know is with us live, Chris King, this morning.
Good morning. So much to cover with you today. So great to have you with us. We begin with President Trump on Cuba in South Florida, where Cuba news is local news. Is it ever? The president's harder line on trade and travel will be felt in Cuba and here in South Florida. In a rousing speech at an historic theater in Little Havana on Friday, the president pretty much closed the door on travel and business openings in Cuba that were created by President Obama 2 years ago.
We will enforce the ban on tourism. We will enforce the embargo. We will take concrete steps to ensure that investments flow directly to the people so they can open private businesses and begin to build their country's great future.
Well, will this new policy result in more political freedom, fewer human rights abuses in Cuba, and what does it mean for business between the two countries?
We have with us today a group of guests with perspectives from all sides. Some introductions first. Sylvia Iriondo is a co-founder and president of Mothers and Women Against Repression. It's a local organization dedicated to human rights and democracy in Cuba. Antonio Rodiles is an outspoken political dissident from Havana who traveled to Miami to be at the president's event this week. Augusto Maxwell is an attorney with the Ackerman firm. He is chair of its Cuba practice and an expert in the complicated rules that govern U.S. trade and business in Cuba. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here this week.
Great to have you all here. Bienvenidos.
Great to be here.
Sylvia Iriondo, I saw you on the stage Friday at the event with President Trump, and you heard him. What was your reaction?
Well, it was a very great day for Cuba, in my opinion. I think that President Trump not only made good the promise he made to the veterans of the Bay of Pigs, but he recognized the struggle of the Cuban people for freedom in Cuba, and he also recognized the victims of that brutal dictatorship. And he did so in Miami, which is the heart of the exiled community, a community whose great majority has not abandoned this unrelenting struggle until democracy.
So you feel that he fulfilled the promise he made to the Bay of Pigs Veterans Brigade 2506 last October when he said he would reverse the policy because, you know, in many ways this looks like a revision but not a reversal.
Well, I think this creates a new dynamic in the political process with Cuba. Whereas Obama gave without having anything in return, President Trump has extended his hand to the Cuban people and taken away the resources for the dictatorship to continue to repress, to beat, and to incarcerate the Cuban people that yearn for freedom.
Those are the kinds of things, I mean, the devil in those details really have to be ironed out, but there's so much that he didn't do. I know, Antonio, you from the get-go 2 years ago were very opposed to President Obama's openings because of many of the things that Sylvia had just said, but still to this day, cruise ships can still go and airlines can still go and people can still travel under the certain categories, but now it's almost as if they're forced into the categories that are handled by the Cuban government when travelers get there. So in your opinion, how much more will this do?
Well, I think that the important point here, the crucial point, is that now the political process is a coherent in a coherent framework. Because before, the political actors were not in the position that they need to be. The regime was almost a friend. The political opposition, even the exiled too, was aside completely of the process. And the administration, the previous administration, was dealing directly with the regime. and we didn't have the impact that we need to have. Even when the repression was increasing too high, there was no condemn to the regime. I think that now we have a coherent framework, and this is a dynamical process too. The president said that. And in relation with how the Cuban regime is going to move, is going to be the reaction also from this administration.
Yeah, Augusto Maxwell, you are the head of the Cuba desk down there at Ackerman Centerfit Fine Law Firm. What does this mean for American Airlines or JetBlue or Carnival or Royal Caribbean, or Starwood Hotels? What is the future for business now?
The first thing that was very clear from the White House briefing and announcement is that none of the rules have taken effect yet, and that the rule process is going to happen in 30 days. Hopefully it'll be completed in 90. The two areas that have been highlighted for change are relatively minor. The first one is the right of an American citizen to self-authorize a people-to-people exchange.
Let me just interrupt briefly to say there have been 12 categories of travel, and under Obama, individual travel was permitted, and really people were not checked on. If they said, I went people-to-people, the government took their word for it.
For example, you could still go today on your own authority to do journalism, or I could do a professional trip, or these folks can do cultural exchange or any other kind of, all those self-certified categories still exist. The one category that will no longer be self-certified was under a category of education, which was people to people, which meant that I was going to go to Cuba to meet Cubans. The belief was that that was ripe for abuse, that really no one was checking to make sure that that was substantive.
And may I say, being abused. I mean, evidence when you travel to Cuba and you see so many tourists doing things like laying on the beach or going where they want. Not that that's a bad thing, no judgment, but that was absolutely an abuse of what was supposed to be the rule.
Yeah, I'll let factual folks figure that out. I think the challenge for the administration is that category of travelers tended to go to Havana, and the American traveler to Cuba tended to seek out educational or cultural or political, or I want to see Havana before he changes kind of stuff. They didn't tend to be the pure tourist that went to the beach. And so I think folks that are concerned about this change worry that it was that type of traveler that had more engagement with Cuba's private sector. If this change takes place, that traveler will now have to go with a tour group, and that tour group is going to be a more controlled experience and probably at more established government-run hotels.
Yeah.
Do you, Antonio, do you, excuse me, do you see that when you are home in Havana? Do you
my
see
experience is that the contact with the Americans has decreased almost to zero, even with the embassy. So the contact with us is now with groups, academics, business people.
With dissidents, you mean?
Yeah, I mean with the opposition dissidents is decreasing almost to zero.
Why is that?
I think because they don't want to bother the bother the regime. The regime is imposing a rule. Even when they reopened the embassy, they didn't invite us to the official event. And then our experience say that the regime is getting everything for nothing.
And what about contact with people who own paladares, the little restaurants, with the Airbnb style rooms? What about tourists and Americans' contacts with those people who may not be dissidents, who may go along with the government line, but still have independent entrepreneurial efforts?
I need to say that in Cuba there are different characteristics for Cubans. There are Cubans that are close to the elite. They have relation with the elite. And then they are allowed to do this kind of big business. They feel more relaxed to do this business. The people are not related with the regime. They have more problems to do that.
If I may add something, these so-called private entrepreneurs, cuentapropistas, the paladares, and I was learning from Antonio, with whom we talk very much. For example, I don't think a lot of people know that after the first $2,000 they make a year, they have to pay the regime 50% of everything that comes in.
But doesn't the question then become, at least they're making something?
But it's such a minimum amount of people that is making something at the expense of filling the coffers of the regime in order to increase the repression and their stay in power, even beyond this so-called retirement of dictator Raúl Castro, which will stay as head of the Communist Party, the only party in Cuba.
All right.
That's why.
Yeah, go ahead, Antonio.
No, that's why I think that the approach to Cuba need to be dynamics. We need to be studying what is happening, how the regime is managing the situation, in order that the benefits be to the people, not to the regime.
Well, that is what the president said the goal of this policy is. Thank you all for coming in. We've only skimmed the surface, but we're going to continue with more guests up next, so stay with us.
Welcome back. We are picking up the debate over President Trump's Cuba policy.
And first, though, we are going to get reaction from the people in Cuba, and that is from our team in Havana. Here is Hetzel Vela.
President Donald Trump reappeared on Cuban TV 9:30 Friday evening. The entire speech accurately translated in Spanish.
Families, Cuban people have benefited a lot.
25-year-old Marla Recio Carvajal plans events and connects American companies with Cuba. She fears rollbacks from a Trump administration would affect many Cubans, specifically those who work with state-run companies with links to the Cuban military.
A lot of venues that I work with are government.
We walked inside in what is now a Havana staple. It's the Paladar, the private restaurant where former President Barack Obama dined. Owner Carlos Marquez thinks Trump should be working to perfect a relationship people in both countries want. After the U.S. and Cuba renewed relations and former President Barack Obama lifted travel restrictions, Marquez says American visitors have skyrocketed. Dissident Miriam Leibar is not surprised by the new policy, but adds it further isolates the American people from Cubans and their needs. Colin Laverty, who runs Cuba Educational Travel, watched the speech, says the new policies do not help the Cuban people.
They put in new regulations that force people away from the private sector and to the state sector.
Up until this point, he says Americans visiting could come on their own, book their private bed and breakfast, hire a private driver. All that, he says, is in danger.
Essentially, they're saying those people are not allowed to come anymore. You need to come in a group with a tour provider that will set you up with a government-owned bus.
Laverty feels the new policies will produce further confusion when it comes to travel to Cuba and will kill demand. I'm Hetzel Vela, reporting from Cuba for This Week in South Florida.
Hetzel, thanks very much. We are joined now by three guests whose commitment to change in Cuba and study of Cuba takes some very different pants. Giancarlo Sopo founded the Cuba One Foundation, which sponsors trips to Cuba for young Cuban Americans to connect to their ancestral roots and culture. Eduardo Gamarra is a professor of politics at Florida International University. He directs its Latino Public Opinion Forum. And Dr. Orlando Gutierrez Boronat co-founded the Cuban Democratic Directorate, a South Florida movement that supports pro-democracy groups in Cuba.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning. Glad to have you come.
Orlando, can we start with you? I think the biggest argument that we hear from really around the country in reverting back to what we have been doing, we being the U.S. with Cuba for 50-something years, is that this country doesn't have embargoes on other countries that violate human rights. That President Trump visited Saudi Arabia, made an arms deal. How do you reconcile that argument with policy so rigid against Cuba?
Well, I think that foreign policy of the United States is suited to each country, each specific interest that the United States may have. In the case of Cuba, there's a very strong Cuban-American community that feels that it's in the best interest of the Cuban people, as expressed by the dissident movement in Cuba, and it's in the best interest of the United States to help the Cuban people achieve a true transition to democracy and freedom in Cuba. The only way to do that is to pressure this 58-year-old regime to sit down at the table with the opposition and negotiate a way towards multi-party elections. I think that President Trump's policy, far from isolating the Cuban people, actually opens up a breathing space for the opposition, for civil society, that has felt the increase in repression that took place as a result of the reading that the Castro regime made of the Obama openings.
Yeah. Giancarlo Sopo, you and your group, Cuba One, have taken, I don't know, a few dozen young Cuban Americans to Cuba. They've never been there. And do you see this new policy as regressive? Do you see it as a step backwards?
Well, we sent the president a letter earlier this week asking him with 6 key recommendations. As a matter of fact, he complied with most of them.
What are the key ones?
The key ones were support for human rights, young people and all Cuban Americans to have unrestricted family travel and remittances rights, support for internet access in Cuba, and to maintain the embassy in Havana.
All right, so he kept all of those, in fact.
Yeah, he kept all of those. I think there's some genuine concern that's not misplaced about how these new regulations will be interpreted and how they will be implemented, and whether they will have unwitting negative effects and driving more people toward state-run hotels instead of the mom-and-pop shops that are set up around the island, and that it could disproportionately affect people who live outside of touristy areas where large groups usually don't go. But I think it's also important to make it clear that individuals can still travel to Cuba so long as they comply with the support for the Cuban people category.
Yeah.
You know, there's such a generational divide, and you see it in the polls, how young Cuban Americans who have exile parents understand the passion and the hurt and the anger and the frustration and the need for change and the need for the Cuban government to respect human rights and hold free elections. But yet, the polls show, Eduardo Gomara, that younger generation would like to see that achieved in a very different way.
Yes, and I don't think it's only the younger generation anymore. And this is really something that came to light as a result of the November elections. That, in fact, it was an older, working class, less educated Cuban American population that voted for Trump, for example. But upper middle class Cubans in Doral and Coral Gables, et cetera, actually voted for Hillary or did not vote for Trump. So we're seeing some really interesting changes in this community, and I think we're going to continue to see those.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Orlando, let me kind of further the point there that Eduardo made. That is, the poll by Engage Cuba that just came out last week showed 65% of Americans favor an opening, better relations with Cuba. And the Mendixon-Amandi firm did a poll last year that showed roughly 60% of Cuban Americans favor better relations and supported the Obama policy. So is what President Trump did really reflective of how most Cuban Americans feel?
Dr. Gomara was my professor at FIU. He's an excellent intellectual. I learned greatly from. We differ on this. I think the true polls are the elections. The true polls is the street. I don't know if we all recall in November and December, the streets of Miami full of young Cubans who were asking for a real change in Cuba and the end of the Castro regime. I think in the elections, I disagree with the analysis of the results. You had precincts in Hialeah that voted 70% against Hillary Clinton to punish the defense of Obama's policies. That means that Cubans who came 50 years ago, Cubans who came 10 years ago, Cubans of all different ages voted against the Obama policy and what it turned out to be at the end. I think there's a great deal of unity in this community about change taking place in Cuba for democracy, for human rights. And I think that to say it's a very diverse community, has very different points of views, but we are very united when it comes to a future for a free democratic Cuba and a true end to a Castro regime.
You know, go ahead.
Jump in here.
I would add that if you totaled the results in Westchester, West Miami, and Hialeah, it actually showed a very narrow race. President Trump had a 2-point margin over Hillary Clinton, while Mitt Romney had about a 12-point margin over over Barack Obama, and John McCain beat Barack Obama by 30 points among Cuban Americans. So, look, I agree. I think both of these positions can be right at the same time. There are differences of opinion among both generations, but a lot of commonalities and shared values.
Yeah, Giancarlo, and my former student is there is no disagreement in terms of one thing. Having not voted for Mr. Trump does not mean that the Cuban Americans are in favor of maintaining the status quo in Cuba. I think, you know, the opinion really is they do want change in Cuba. It's how to go about changing Cuba, and that's what's differentiating these camps.
Now, my point
and
is
so
that
we can go in either direction.
The Obama
frankly.
policy at the end was widely unpopular in this community. There was a broad rejection of it. If you're in the street, if you talk to people, you see it.
Of the Obama policy?
Of the Obama policy. It was widely rejected in the community.
In the exile community.
I think it's very much in the polls in the elections. It's very much in the polls of the congressional candidates who were elected. It's very much evident in the streets of who turned out there and what they were calling for. People don't like a policy towards Cuba that puts business interests over human rights. They don't like a policy that opens up to the regime and makes unilateral concessions without gaining anything from that regime. The fact that the mastermind of the murder of the 4 Brothers to Rescue pilots was sent to Havana in that manner.
And the president mentioned the Brothers to the Rescue shoot-down, and he introduced 5, in fact, Cuban dissidents, including Antonio Rodiles. Eduardo Gamara, I have to ask you, Senator Marco Rubio made the point in a Facebook posting before the president spoke that this policy is supposed to allow the Cuban people, the cuentapropistas, the other people who want more opening, to put the pressure on the Castro government to allow change, to allow them to do business. I mean, is the Castro government really going to change because the Cuban people have been asking for opening for 58 years?
I think there's 2 contradictions here. On the one hand is the idea that there has been a significant change in policy. There hasn't. Much of the Obama, in fact, most of what President Obama initiated has remained in place. Secondly, if you're trying to strengthen the cuentapropistas and the small business in Cuba, you don't do it by strengthening basically the capacity of the Cuban state to make more money. And I think that, you pointed it out in your comments a moment ago. Most people today are not going to be going to these smaller businesses. They're going to be going into these large packages where the state really has a role.
That's going to be the final word here. Thank you all for coming in. We could have this discussion all afternoon long, but I'm glad we had some of it this morning.
The Democratic candidates for Florida governor are in town this weekend, and for one of them, it's the first foray into politics, and we will introduce you to Chris King right here next.
This is a big weekend for Florida Democrats. The party gathered in Hollywood for a weekend of forums and fundraising.
Vice President Joe Biden, in fact, headlined last night's gala at the Diplomat Hotel. Earlier on that agenda, a panel with the 3 leading Democrats running for governor next year.
They include former Congresswoman Gwen Graham of Tallahassee, Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum, and also Orlando businessman Chris King. Chris King is from Winter Park, just outside Orlando. He is the CEO of a company that invests in affordable housing developments. He is a first-time political candidate and a self-described progressive entrepreneur, I believe is the phrase you use. Good morning. We're glad you could come in.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So define for us, what is a progressive or a progressive entrepreneur?
Absolutely. So I am a progressive. I believe in equality, in fairness, and opportunity, care for the neediest among us. It's how I've run my company. But I've always tried to marry that to entrepreneurial values, to stewardship and integrity and hard work. For me, it's been a magic in business. It's made it very successful. We think it could be a magical formula for government.
You know, this weekend, if you were following the panel, they didn't call it a debate that you had with Gwen Graham and Andrew Gillum. This was a panel, and it was a panel where the 3 of you largely agreed on almost everything, all the topics. So the interesting question becomes, you're running against a former congresswoman with a rock star name in Florida, Graham. You're running against a Tallahassee mayor who's got a pretty good track record and a lot of endorsements racked up and some money. And how do you differentiate yourself from them and make Florida know you and choose you over those candidates?
Well, we think our message differentiates us. What I argue, and what I argued at the forum this weekend, is that Florida has become a back-of-the-pack state in nearly every economic and quality of life measurement. And our one-party state government in Tallahassee now for 2 decades has not been able to fix that. And so what I'm arguing is for the Democrat to win in 2018, that Democrat has to have a vision of how to build a more fair economy.
All right, so back of the pack, as you say, Governor Scott, of course, refused Medicaid money, over $1 billion, several $billion dollars from Washington. Is that one of the areas where you think that you, if you were governor, would accept the money, you know, make Medicaid services available to what, 800,000 Floridians?
Absolutely. That was a tragic decision. We have 2.6 million Floridians without access to a doctor who knows their name. Governor Scott has suggested, the jobs, governor, that we have had tremendous job growth. But Florida, of the 10 biggest states, is dead last in wages, in incomes, and in per capita productivity.
You know, let me jump in here. This week, the governor's office sent out city by city job growth and category job growth, and according to the governor's office, there has been job growth, professional and business services, 53,000 jobs added, leisure and hospitality, 35,000 jobs, education and health, 34,000 jobs, and there are more. The governor tours the state, taking a lot of credit for huge job growth in this state.
But what he doesn't suggest is the other half of the story, that 45% of the jobs in Florida, imagine that, nearly half of the jobs in Florida pay less than $15 an hour.
Whose statistic is that?
It's a common statistic by a lot of groups that have come out for us, and it's a big reality, and it's something that I see on a daily basis in the field.
All right, so the average wage right now, minimum wage is $8.10 an hour.
Yes.
Would you favor 15 an hour, 12?
I would definitely favor an increase in the minimum wage. I mean, for my business, our base wage for entry-level workers is $15. So the challenge is for Florida, as we grow this economy, how over a period of time do we address that? Because when I talk about Florida being the 41st in the nation with per capita productivity, those are the state's numbers. Those are public numbers that we've gotten. What Scott also doesn't suggest is from 2000 to 2015, our per capita GDP barely grew an inch. That's a story that this campaign is going to be telling everywhere we go.
You know, Chris, affordable housing is a big issue and becoming even bigger, especially in urban centers like South Florida. That is your business, affordable housing. There is the Sadowski Fund, as you know, the state's fund for affordable housing. Money from dock stamps goes in there this year, every year. This year, 2/3 of that was put back in the general revenue. Those who oppose the governor's moves call it a raid. What are your ideas for making housing affordable to those people who would get those jobs that pay much better?
Glenna, it is the passion of my life. We have an affordable housing crisis in South Florida. We have it in Orange County where I live. We have it in Hillsborough and Pinellas. The raids on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund are another example, much like the Medicaid expansion or failure to take it, of tragic decision making. $1.7 billion, again, state's numbers, has been raided from 2000 to 2015, and that grew this year. That has cost our state upwards of 84,000 affordable homes. So one of the first things Governor King would do is to stop the raids on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Chris King, great to have you come in, even have a brief conversation, and we're going to invite you to come back with Gwen Graham, Andrew Gillum. At some point we're going to have a debate. I want you to be part of it.
Thank you for having me.
Who were invited today but could not make it.
Yes, they were.
Up next, we take it all to the roundtable. Stay with us. Let's get right to our Powerhouse Roundtable for some informed analysis and measured opinion on the week's top stories. Mary Lee Cancio is a Miami-based attorney who is active in the Republican Party. Sergio Bustos is senior editor for Politico Florida. He's also covered state politics for the Associated Press and the Miami Herald. Marlon Hill is a Miami attorney with the Hamilton, Miller and Berthasell firm and a past president of the Caribbean Bar Association. Welcome, everyone.
Great to have you here. Good morning. Sergio Bustos, you are a political veteran covering these events. I know I was in the room on Friday when the president spoke, and it was just an electric setting. I mean, I know you were there too, Marley. I think that, however, if you kind of look at it dispassionately, you got to say what really changed other than making individual travel to Cuba much harder and saying that Americans can't stay at hotels run by the Cuban military.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that President Barack Obama may have normalized relations with Cuba, but he didn't normalize Cuba per se. You know, I wish I had written that myself.
That's
by a
line.
political colleague, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll give credit to my political colleague, Michael Grunwald. But the point was, he had just visited the island and said that, you know, it's only been 2.5 years, but there's not an explosion of capitalism or democracy, for that matter, on the island. Yes, there's tourism spending and all, but it could take a while. Now, the critics are going to argue, and rightfully so, that was 2.5 years of a policy as opposed to 56 years of another. Mm-hmm. So, but this must feel like, for folks there and for folks here too, this like whiplash with Cuban policy, because it keeps changing whoever comes in the White House.
Mary Lee was there too, and front and center. We saw you in all the shots. And you know, Mary Lee, I know this is a big win for people. You come from a Cuban exile family. The biggest argument I hear is that it doesn't go far enough. It may not work reversing that because it just isn't tough enough.
I think it's tough enough in the sense that 60% of the Cuban economy is controlled by the Cuban government or the military. Mm-hmm. And when you create a directive saying that it will be against U.S. law to do business with companies connected to the Cuban government, I think that will hurt the Cuban government. President Trump wants a better deal. He wants them to come to the table. It's up to the Cuban government to come and say, okay, we want to improve relations. We have an embassy there. We're not closing it, but we don't have an ambassador. And there will be things that will hurt the Cuban government. I don't think they'll be able to travel as freely here to this country because the new policy that the president signed, and after he signed, he gave it to Senator Rubio. He says, you keep this. It was the little things. I think the biggest thing that I got that day was that he was honoring the Cuban exile community that was excluded from the negotiations by the Obama administration. When President Obama went to Cuba and gave that beautiful speech, I was so moved. That speech was absolutely beautiful, except that there were pretty words. There were no actions. And what we're seeing now is that it's a policy directed, recognizing that it's a communist regime. It's an American president coming out, an American president, vice president, the senator, the governor, the lieutenant governor, Secretary of Commerce coming to this little theater in Miami saying, you matter. We are with the Cuban people, and we are with Cuban people and not with the Castro regime.
What really changed for me, I think, is the political wins, Michaels, right? So this better deal that we speak about, and the president said this week, we're all in Washington working on behalf of America, right? So President Obama certainly is working, on behalf of freedom of Cuba. But what we have here is a Cuban sandwich, right? With the Cuban people in the middle, the regime on top, the U.S. government here, and everyone's trying to battle. Do we put pickles? Do we put queso? Right? And President Obama put it. President Trump took it off. Right? At the end of the day, we still have to focus on how do we support and empower the Cuban people to move the country to change, democratization, choosing their leadership, freedom of the press, decreasing repression of dissidents. How do we get there? And the approach may be different from both presidents, but at the end of the day, the electricity that you spoke about in that our team at Theater is about the political wins. Senator Rubio, Representative Diaz-Balart, they definitely did their job in terms of
the wind is at their back, and they were the influencers, I think, in this policy, were they not, Sergio?
Oh,
I think Senator Rubio particularly comes out, really empowered because of this policy. And let's put it on the record, he took a lot of humiliation from President Trump, held his tongue because this is what he wanted.
You mean Little Rubio?
Or Little Marco.
Little Marco Rubio. Again, credit to my props to Mark Caputo, who in this week really outlined from the very beginning, once Trump was elected. Rubio himself said he had spoken to Donald Trump, and Trump himself had told him, how do we make things better
for the Cuban people?
Right.
Yeah.
But I want to make this point. Ultimately, the question for the U.S. administration, be it Republican or Democrat, is it willing to accept, tolerate a communist regime or government, so long as that economy is capitalistic, as long as it's an open market.
Well, and as long as there are human rights, which it's about the rights and freedoms of the people, is my understanding.
Well, yeah, but on that point, we've accepted China and Vietnam. I think what you got to remember is Cuba, U.S.-Cuba policy is forever tied to presidential politics here. Mm-hmm. We're in Florida. I mean, I think if there were Chinese-American lawmakers, in the Senate, in the House, Vietnamese American lawmakers in the Senate and the House, you might have a different debate about trade with Vietnam or, or China.
You would definitely have a different debate if they were 90 miles from your shores and they pointed, missiles to your people, and they were swearing that they were going to destroy our country. They continue to be enemies of our country.
Oh, I know, but Vietnam was at war with us.
Yes, but they're not 90 miles, and you don't have 3 Cuban Americans in Congress that are very influential.
It's tied to presidential politics.
It's not only that, it's the right politics.
Well, how the Cuban regime is going to react is going to be the question, right? As was said in the previous segment, the regulations are going to take about 30 to 90 days to be written, and everything remains status quo until then. So for anyone that's interested in following this very important island to South Florida, you need to go to the Treasury website, look at and see exactly what's going to happen with the OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control regulations, so how that's going to impact travel.
Are you with a group? Is in the detail.
Are you going by yourself?
Yes.
Who are you going with? For what purpose? You need to look into that before you go.
They have 30 days from the day that the policy was signed for the different departments of Treasury, Secretary, and Commerce to write the rules.
All right, everybody hold your thoughts. We've got a lot more to talk about. Continue here with the Roundtable after a break. Welcome back. We are in the midst of what I think is a very interesting roundtable. I think you would agree. And Marlon Hill, let me ask you, I think in your career as a fighter for human rights and civil rights, you know a lot about that subject. And what the president said on Friday is, I'm making these changes in policy for the Cuban people to have more human rights, to not be abused by their own government. Does this policy lead towards that? Will it improve their lives?
Well, it's a question that's averted, that's out, right? The most important thing that I think the policy changes is separating how the Cuban regime is treated, right? Putting them in the box, and then trying to move more towards giving more support to the Cuban people. The more support that you can give to the regular person that has a business, that's struggling to just care for their families.
500,000 people, last figure I saw from Mike Fernandez in Coral Gables, had gotten licenses to be small business people in Cuba. And those are the people who the president says we need to help them. Will this policy do it?
Absolutely. I think when you move the focus from helping the big chain of hotels or businesses controlled by the government and moving it to the private sector, it's going to foster the private sector. That's what we want. We want people to have more freedoms and more free enterprise.
So how, though, if right now the people who have those licenses and are the free enterprise there need to, we talked about this before, give a certain percentage of what they make to the Cuban government, how will that change now? If this policy really does foster the independent entrepreneur in Cuba is still forfeiting a percentage of what he or she makes to the government.
The U.S. traveler, Glenna, has to really pay very close attention as to how they're going to travel to support the Cuban people.
But my point is, no matter where that dollar goes, part of it still goes to the government.
But Glenna, I believe the number I heard before was $2,000, over $2,000. The average salary in Cuba is between $20 and $30. That's the official monthly salary for a person. So if they're making $2,000, they're so much better off than anybody else. That, as long as we improve their lives, that they know that we're with them. Because what they resent, what made me really sad was to hear the dissident. Because when we were in that theater, some people said, well, Mary Lee, you were born in exile, you've never been to Cuba, so what do you know? So I know where the dissidents live. I know what Las Damas de Blanco, the ladies in white, go through every Sunday. They've been beaten every Sunday for over 100 Sundays. So those people live there, and those people are the ones that are going to make the change inside their island. I am, a very fortunate American to live in this country that I respect and honor my parents' heritage, but the people inside Cuba are the ones that are going to make the change.
Yeah. When will that tipping point occur for the Cuban people, though, in terms of them making that decision for the future of their country?
When they have free elections, when they don't have a Castro anymore, a guy that was involved, in firing squads that's still there almost after 60 years. When there is real change in Cuba, when people can, go to vote, when people have a democratic change, when they don't jail people, that's change.
But the United States has relations with Saudi Arabia any number of
Saudi
countries.
Arabia is an ally of our country for better or for worse. Cuba has
No,
not
but
been
if
an ally
it's all
of
about
ours.
human rights, then you've got to look around the
It
world
is
and
more
say.
than that.
And China has been a consistent abuser of human rights before Tiananmen Square and after. You know,
Two wrongs don't make a right. I don't think that we should support
no.
any place that
Yeah,
doesn't respect
you know,
human
just
rights.
to, if I can, Marlon, to pick up on a point that Marilee made earlier, the President Obama, made an eloquent speech when he opened the embassy in Havana. The problem was not his speech. The problem was there was no reciprocity from the Castro government. All the things that we asked them to do, they really did not do, and they did get more repressive for human rights activists.
Ultimate goal is the journey to freedom for Cuba, right? And you never get everything in the deal. We talk about a better deal, the best deal, never happens immediately.
He went to a baseball game with Raul Castro. President Trump embraced a Cuban prisoner, a woman that spent 15 years in jail, Cari Roque. I think that's the big difference that we see, that one person recognizes what's happening to the people and the other one is trying to appease the government.
Real quickly, Sergio, February, Raul Castro said he'll step down. Do you think President Trump is very mindful he's going to be the first president of the United States in half a century to deal with Cuba not under Castro?
A non-Castro regime. But, you know, the system in place there is just amazing in terms of how they've been able to maintain this security apparatus.
Yeah.
So I don't think things are going to change because they've already got something worked out, which, again, they're going to be as repressive as ever.
Sergio, I'm going to have to interrupt. I beg your pardon. Thank you all for coming in. Fascinating time.
Happy Father's Day.
All right, thanks. Still to come, my personal perspective on President Trump's revised Cuba policy.